Welcome, CS13 to Components Day 1. Components, what are they and why do we use the word component? Well, that's what we're going to talk about. We have one objective in here, but there really are more than this. But right now it's understand and apply JavaScript class syntax and creating element components. So what we're going to be using is all of the things that you've been learning up until yesterday. We're going to jam everything that we've learned from even day one. So just HTML, CSS, JavaScript fundamentals, DOM. We're going to put them all together today. And that's what we basically call a component. So as we build larger and more rich web pages, we may have noticed a trend in our code. Elements are essentially using the same functionality and styling with minor differences. So basically what we're trying to do is create reusable pieces of code that we can pass things through and make them smart. So that's what we're going to be doing today. It's going to be really fun. So we're going to learn and understand and apply JavaScript class syntax and creating element components. This is brand new to you today. And I expect to be some, confusion at first, but eventually we're going to get this figured out. So a lot of this stuff is already in here. We're going to be talking about these things in the training kit. But for today, we're going to jump in and just kind of look at some code. So in this case, let's kind of review where we've been. So first off, in fact, I'm probably just going to borrow from yesterday. So let me go do that. Because we don't need to recreate the wheel when it comes to our HTML. So let's just get yesterday's stuff. Oh, did I not put it in the collection? Shoot. Okay, there's our DOM 2. Let me add this to the collection. There we go. And in fact, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to take everything. So this will at least give us a nice jumping point into where we're going today. And you're familiar with this, so it's double win here. Okay, settings, behavior. Let me control the behavior. All right. Let's see. Got to turn on the less. Run it. All right, there we go. Okay. And then we'll bring in our code and we'll slim this up really quick though. Could have just forked that. Oh well. All right. So yesterday we learned how, in our 3-step process, how to add an event to something. Step 1, get the reference, right? You've got to be able to grab whatever the heck it is that we want to listen to. So set the reference. And in this case, let's get everything cut down to just the hamburger menu. So we'll get rid of all this stuff. And then we'll say, Hamburglar, where are you at? There you are. Okay. So let's just keep it simple right now. So in this case, we grab our reference. Get rid of all my comments here because we know that stuff now. We've got hamburger in memory. We then go to hamburger. We add an event listener. We tell it what type of event, right? Because that does matter, as you learned yesterday with your 10 unique events. And then we have a callback function. This callback function can either pass in an event object, right? Or it always passes it in whether we use it or not. Like, it's always available to us. But in this case, we used tween max to pop in our code here. And so let's see. Oh, I didn't bring in the library. So in this case, we could toggle a class, right? So let's see. Well, I guess I could just bring this in really quick just to get us all caught up. Green sock animation. Oh, that's CSS, Josh. Come on. There you are. Okay. Now we'll run it, and we should see that little whoop. There it is. So that was kind of end of day. That's where we got. But really, I mean, it was just this simple, even though we kind of toyed around with the event propagation, prevent default. We learned about traversing the DOM, right? So all these things were from yesterday. Well, we're going to expand on this more today. Okay. So is there any burning questions from yesterday, though, that you're like, man, if I could just ask that, I would really, now that you've played around with some stuff, because really yesterday and Monday really do go into today. So I just want to make sure there's anything I can help out. Okay, Clint says, is event different than a normal function parameter? Yes, it is. I mean, it's a function parameter, but like if we were to say, let's do this, console.log event dot and then current target. So let's see what the log says when we run this. Click. So it grabs our current target that we clicked on, which was what we put the event listener on, which happens to be our image tag. So if it's just a normal parameter, we should be able to say whatever we want here, right? And then say whatever.current target, and let's see if this works. What do you think? Think that's going to work? Let's see. Aha. So because it's following a click string, because it's just because it's inside of an event listener, it is implicit that the event object is going to be passed in. So it doesn't have to actually say event. And remember, I talked about this yesterday. A lot of developers just say E to keep it succinct. So you'll see E quite a bit in live code. So it is a special parameter associated with event listeners. Okay, so if we go to the add event listener in the MDN, so we can come in here and you can see that we've got add event listener, what type is it? And then the listener is going to be passed in. So the object which retrieves a notification, object that implements the event interface. And so that event interface we know to be all the stuff that like current target, all that stuff exists inside of here. So the event interface allows us to do these special things. So add event listener has it part of its syntax. It's like part of what we're doing. Okay? So that's why we can say whatever, we can say E, because when we're using add event listener, we're using a special syntax, reserved to the DOM on that API. So does that make sense, Clint? I think that's a really good question. And the answer is it's not the same as a normal function. I mean, functionality-wise, it acts like a function, but it's very unique to the event listener. Okay, awesome. Lauren says, is there a way to toggle the animation so when you click the hamburger again, the menu goes away? Yeah. So you should be able to toggle off and on. You could say if this opacity is, you could check the opacity on the CSS class and then toggle it off and on. But you can try that out on your own. But there is a way. Luis-san says, can you modify properties of the event object? So if you look at the event object and you're saying client X, screen X, so you just got to go look at this and say, does it let me do it? So can I mess around with those things? So if we go to mouse event and look at the properties, you can see these are read only. So if it says read only on the properties, you cannot, of course, manipulate them. But at least you can read them. Okay, let's see. Brian says, is there a way to access the event without passing it in as a parameter? Or is it bound to that event when the add event listener constructs it? Great question. So basically you're saying, do we have to pass in an E right here? Let's find out. Clear the console, run it, hit the button, and notice that it does not console log our event. So we have to pass in the parameter explicitly in this case to have access to it. I'm going to show you a case today where that's not always the case. But in a normal event listener right here, you do have to pass in at least a reference that you want to use the event object as you pass in that parameter. Michelle says, is there another event reference you can recommend other than MDN? I couldn't really get the non-mouse events to work. I found that I need more detailed explanations and samples. MDN, like, I think does the best job of listing everything available to you. And then you can take those, so like MDN events. So you're saying, hey, I went down here, and outside of the mouse events, which were straightforward, like key down, you're going, hey, I'm not really like understanding how they did this, and they didn't give any good examples. I mean, there is one example here on keys, so, but even then, it wasn't probably a good one. So at this point, I would just go into Google and say, okay, what exists in key down? So I'm sure that there's like a JavaScript event. There's got to be something out there that's. I really like JavaScript info. This is a Russian team that these guys are originally from Russia, and I think they still are in Russia, and they were just super obsessed with JavaScript, and they put this together. I love it. I mean, it's probably one of the best, most in-depth guides I've ever seen to JavaScript. And so this could be another place you could go. So let me give you this. I really like that site. So that could be somewhere to go. Let's see. Where's their DOM stuff? DOM. There we go. Attributes, modifying DOM, walking the tree. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what's inside of here. Obviously, I don't have time to review that today, but I'll look for some better resources, Michelle, so that we can get some more examples to you. I think that's fair. W3C had more examples for events. I agree. W3C schools is what you're talking about. I think they have some really good events too. So I'll get some better resources there. I appreciate that feedback. Okay. I think that is enough for us to move on to today. So let's talk about components and how they work. So we've talked about this. We've talked about you have an object, a DOM object on the stage. Oh my gosh, that was Flash coming out in the DOM. And DOM allows us to listen to this, and then we add an event listener to it. We have a special click event. We pass in an event object, and we can do something with that object. So I think everybody's like feeling at least somewhat familiar, if not really comfortable with this concept here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to introduce some new concepts that kind of go along with this. For example, let's just add some buttons to the bottom of this down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say at the bottom of our div here, I'm going to add a div called buttons. And within buttons, I'm going to have more divs called button. Okay? And then within this button, I'll just say button 1. And I'm just going to copy and paste this 4 times so we get 4 buttons. Now you might be going, and good on you, hey, why aren't you just using the semantic button? And that's because I hate styling semantic buttons, and we don't need them right now, so that's why. So if we go into where we are inside of our code, I just saved it so you're all caught up if you want to catch up about what I wrote. We have our main nav, and then inside of our main heading, we're in header, and then we've got just some random content. So we probably should wrap this inside of a section tag if we're being good. So we'll say section, main content, and then we'll just grab all this stuff. Let's see here. Where did this extra div come from? That's why we do this. So we have this p tag, h2. Let's pop these inside of the section tag. And then let's grab our buttons. Button, who's got the button right there? That's where it came from. Okay, I just want to compartmentalize this a little bit so that we're kind of separate from other pieces. So that's why I built that section to separate us from our header and our content. So it looks like this. So you can kind of see the lay of the land. I cannot stress enough to you the value of being able to read and understand simple HTML structure. And hopefully you're going, you know what, you're right, because the DOM has so many different things that we need to traverse. So let's take this stuff and let's go ahead and visualize. Where is that thing? DOM visualizer, there it is. So remember this from our DOM visualization lesson, day 1. I can pop our code in here and it shows me the tree, right? This is the DOM tree right here, the DOM view. And so in the DOM tree, you can visualize the parent-child relationships with the lines that they've given us. So in this case, we can see that main content section has children inside of it, right? But they're all tree-like in their structure here. It looks like a tree as it expands out. So in the section main content, it is part of what? It is part of our container home combo, which we'll just reference as home. And then header is part of that. So then we can start saying, well, header and section are siblings. So remember, DOM traversal allows us to move up and down the DOM depending on where we are, and we can find out parent-child relationships really quickly, right? So what I want to do is show you, first off, this is going to help you with your assignment today. So that's why I'm bringing it up again. You've got to look at your HTML and study the structure. So if you're taking notes, I want you to put a big note down that says, I need to always study the HTML first before you start jumping into JavaScript. Because if you know your HTML structure, your JavaScript DOM stuff is 10 times easier because you know where you are. If you get lost in the weeds of HTML, like this is pretty weedy right here. I mean, look at that. That's a lot of stuff. If you get lost in these weeds, you start to lose your bearings on the DOM. So again, big red letter tip right there, pay attention to where you are in your HTML. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time in your JavaScript. Okay? I just feel like I need to say that because inevitably people get lost in the HTML today. So in this case, our buttons, if we were to minimize all of our elements, you can now see inside of our main content, I've got an H2 right there. I've got a P tag right there. And then I've got this buttons class right here with 4 buttons inside of it. You're going, I get it. Okay, let's move on. Okay, good. I'm glad you get it. So then let's go down to here. We've got container, we've got H1, we've got home, we've got header, and now we're going to introduce our next class, which is going to be our main content. Then within main content, we've got our buttons. And then within our buttons, we've got our button. So I'm just matching my structure that I've got here. Again, the value of understanding our HTML, right? So there's our main content, there's our buttons, there's our button. Okay, so in this case, what I'll do is I'll just say, give it a width. And we'll just say 100 by 45. And then we'll say border 1px solid red. Save it, run it. And there's our derpy looking buttons. Now we can make these look prettier, right? We can use a mix-in or something of center. But in our case, we'll just say display flex justify content center and align items center. Save, run. And there we go. We've got things that are starting to look like buttons. We can even put some border radius on here. 10px, right? So guys, I just want to show you that your CSS skills do not die. Okay? You need these CSS skills to continue to survive as a full stack web developer. So all the stuff that we talked about in the first week is viable. Like, I'm working on a project at night right now for some freelance fun, and you better believe I'm using CSS like every day. So you have to understand that CSS does not go away. And I want some of you, I think, maybe some of you are thinking, okay, we're progressing, we're like growing up out of CSS. And the answer is no way. Hopefully you're increasing your CSS knowledge as you go. Okay, so here's our buttons. And of course, if I want to make them look like they're clickable, I could say cursor, pointer. And then we can get that Mickey Mouse hand that we love to see. Okay, there we go. There's our 4 buttons. Now, in their current state, these buttons are pretty dumb. They don't do anything, right? They're just sitting there. So going off of what we've already learned, we can say, well, let's go and get our first button here. So we'll say button 1, so we can grab something very specific here. So I'm just going to copy and paste my hamburger kind of mentality. And I'm going to get some separation here and say, buttons. And I'm going to say button 1, assign the value of, document query selector, and then we're going to get our first thing that matches button 1, right? And then we're just going to copy and paste this same concept. And in fact, we're just going to hide this for now so we're not confused by anything. And we're going to say button 1, add event listener click, here's the event, and get rid of this tween max stuff. So now let's make sure that we're on the right button. So we'll hit save, we'll hit run. I'm going to hit my first button. And lo and behold, we have our button, right? And it's grabbing our content. Everything's similar and we're looking good. So at this point, I can mess around with my button. I can change things. This button is now smart, right? I can do something with it. So the problem is, now if I want to get this button to be smart, what do I got to do? Well, I got to go over here, button 2, come in here, button 2, come in here, button 2, right? I'm copying my own code, which is not good, not very dry, right? So I come in here, I run it, look at my console. Let's see, I did the same value there. Save, run, console, clear, okay, run. So now I'm going, okay, here's button 1, here's button 2, right? So you guys can see already how stupid this is. Like, it feels stupid. It feels like too caveman, too primitive. But in a lot of cases, I mean, the only other way to get around this would be to have one event listener on each button. So if we were to go like, okay, let's do this, const button, assign the value of, and then we just grab the original class itself, button, right? Just grabbed anything that's button, these guys, right? And then we said, okay, button, when you're clicked, let's see what you are. So we'll go like this. Console.log, and we'll run it. And we'll hit our button 1. And the problem is, in this scenario, it's trying to grab the first thing that matches button, right? So yes, I'm seeing some of you say, well, what about query selector all? Good job. So let's go ahead, pop in query selector all, and let's see what we can do. So the problem is, at this point, query selector all grabs what? What is it grabbing when we use query selector all? It's grabbing all of them. What is it returning, though? A node list. Good job, Alejandro. Luisan, good guess. But that's going to be our get tag elements, right? So our new DOM stuff, query selector all, gives us node lists. So we could loop through each one of these and then assign the event listener. But even that is a little laborious. We'd have to go through here, but that would be actually a valid option. So you obviously can see where I'm going. I'm trying to show you how clunky this is. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make each one of these buttons really smart. They can all do something. And so enter all of the new fun stuff today. So what we're going to do, this is going to feel crazy at first, and then it's going to feel a lot more like, wow, this is awesome. So just bear with me for a second. What we're going to do is we're going to reference this new query selector all where we're grabbing every button, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of our individual button. And we're going to say buttons. Now you guys know, without this event listener right now, if we were to console.log this, if I were to say button, and we run this and we try to look at it, it's going to go in the log and it's going to yell at us, but that's because it's got a huge node list in it. So I want you to understand, right there, there's our node list. Okay, you need to understand this, guys. This is a huge deal, my friends, that you understand that we're grabbing each one of these buttons off of the DOM, okay? And you're going, oh, yeah, I get it. Why are you saying it so slow and weird? That's because we're about to do stuff with this that we've not done before. And so here we go. What I'm going to do is I'm now going to take the buttons that I grabbed. So let's change this to say buttons because I want you to understand that it's multiple buttons getting passed in. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my buttons that I just made. So you just saw that. It's a node list, right? I'm going to use the assignment operator. This is crazy already because in the DOM, remember, the DOM is live, meaning if I make changes to anything in my JavaScript using the DOM API, it will update the view live. Remember how we did that with everything? We changed colors, we did all that stuff last 2 days. Well, now we're going to change a whole button out. So we're actually going to replace this whole button with a brand new button. So here's how we do it. First off, we've got to get rid of our node list. We've got to turn it into an array. So remember that array.from. So array.from takes a shallow node or array-like list and turns it into an array. So what is that? Well, a node list fits that description perfectly. So what we can do is we can say, I want you to assign the value of our reference to buttons, but now I want you to update that reference and turn it into an array. So it's like we used itself to turn itself into an array. But because we have an array, we can now map, right? And I can just chain an easy little map down here, and I can map over this. Well, but remember, map is usually used to convert something. Well, that's because I'm going to introduce something that's going to blow your mind right now. So I'm going to make a new button. So I'm going to say button. I'm going to use an arrow function because I'm not passing anything that needs anything more than this. I'm going to use the new keyword. And when you see the new keyword, what do you think? What do you think when you see the new keyword? You think new instance. And yes, I can't use const here because I have multiple items. Good idea. Sorry, I saw that. So new, and then I'm going to use a new button with a capital B. Oh, snap. And then what am I going to pass into it? Well, I'm going to pass the reference of the button. So basically, remember that map. Let's go look at map real quick. Let's go review it really quickly. So I'm going to go to my JavaScript fundamentals. I'm going to go down to day 2. I'm going to go look at map. Let's see, where are you, map? For each reduce map. Okay. So remember that when we use map, we can pass in the actual item, right? So in this case, we were passing in state, which was the state of Washington, New York, or, you know, it's not state in the words of JavaScript, React, or anything. It's an actual state in the data object. So when we're using map, remember that we have three options we can pass, but the first one's the only one that's required. And that is the actual thing that you want to map over. So that's just a quick review of what map does. And so what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we want the button that we passed in from each one of these buttons, right? I'm calling a button because that's what it is. Remember, it's just a placeholder. So I could say jib jab, and if jib jab worked, and if I was consistent, it would work. Like, this would be valid code. But I'm just calling it button because it is a button, and I want it to be more sensical to me. So to review this whole line, buttons, I'm grabbing all four of these buttons off the DOM, 1, 2, 3, 4. They're all getting sucked into this thing. Then I'm assigning the value of those buttons on here to now be an array. And then I chained. So remember, chaining is when you can pass a method onto something that's already been used. And this is very common, by the way. You see this pattern a lot where you're chaining array methods. We're then taking our map, which then allows us to take in one value, the value that's being passed in. So this is basically this. And then we're saying, all right, now make a new button. The reason I used an arrow function is because I just didn't want to have a ton of code to look at. So in this case, new button, and then the capital B means I've got to create a class. Well, if I've got to create a class and classes are not hoisted, that means I've got to declare my class at the top of the page here. So here we go. Class button. All right. And in this case, well, classes don't look like that. That's what a constructor looks like. That's what a class looks like. And then we have our constructor, right? And then within our constructor, we also have methods, right? If we write anything method bound here. But right now we don't have any methods, so we're going to say constructor. And then what do you think we're going to pass in here, guys? What will be passed in here? That's right, Zai, button, because we literally passed it in over here. So button is going to get passed in here. So now let's just see where the heck we are. Let's do console.log, and let's see what the heck is going on. So I'm going to come in here. Let me see. I don't have any other console logs messing around. I'm going to move hamburger down here just for a second. In fact, I'm just going to get rid of hamburger for a second. We'll just focus. Oh, no, there it is. It's just further down the page. Okay. So I'm going to save this and run it. And look at this, you guys. This is really interesting. Notice what's going on. I only have one console log. So let me clear this, make sure I have one log. There we go. So what's happening right here is, remember, map is running, it's a loop, right? It loops over everything. So we're looping over our DOM object here, which happens to have 4 buttons inside of it, which then calls button 4 times, right? It's a callback. It's running every time. It's just it's happening so fast we don't know it, right? And so in our case, because we're humans and we can't comprehend the speed of computing, like we can't visualize it, we put a console log inside here in our constructor, and we can see that this thing was actually ran 4 times when I hit the run button. Isn't that cool? So now we can say, here's button 1, here's button 2, here's button 3, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So now I have access to all 4 of these buttons. But remember, map is returning the value. It's just implicitly happening because we're using this arrow function, right? But inside of if we go back to our review, you can see the return statement right here. That's because they're passing in multiple parameters. when you're not passing in multiple parameters, you don't have to use the parentheses in the return statement. So we're doing the same thing. That's why I'm going like turtle speed right now, because we're about to do some really cool stuff with this. So now that I've got access to these 4 buttons individually, one by one, let's just think about it as one button at a time instead of all 4, right? Because it's going to do it 4 times. So let's just think the first time we go through this, do it to the one button, and we know that all the other buttons will get the same treatment. So what we can do is we can say this dot, and this dot is referencing what? It's referencing this button, right? Because it's coming in from the DOM. Well, it's not referencing it yet because we have to say this dot, and we could say item, we could say whatever we want. So we could say this dot item is assign the value of the button that came into the DOM. So now we've got a reference inside of our own class that is now native to this keyword inside of here. And this is just like when we set up our objects with Pebbles and Fred and everything, right? Except this time, instead of sending in like name, toy, all that stuff we did, we're passing in a DOM object. This is pretty cool. So we're actually passing in this whole thing as this property that we can reference as this dot item. All right, so now let's try this out. Let's put our console down here and say, well, what the heck is this dot item? Save, clear, run. It's the same thing, right? It's just now it's referencing inside the constructor. So basically we're preparing this button to be used inside of this function with the this keyword, so we can start messing around with it. Okay, pretty cool. So now let's try to add a method to it. So now we can say this dot item, right? Because now we know that's just the button. And then we know how to do this. Add event listener, right? And then an event listener accepts a parameter of what it is, and we're going to just do a click event. And then it needs a callback function. Well, we can do a method. So let's do this. We can say this dot btn click. Okay, I don't know, not being very original. So btn click. We'll come down here. We'll make a new method. So we'll say method. And in this case, it's going to be btn click. Right? And remember, the class syntax is pretty unique that way. And now let's just say console.log. I was clicked. Let's see if this thing even works. All right, so I'll get rid of this log here. Save, clear, run. All right, now let's see if our buttons are clickable. So click, 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 click. Oh, we just made our buttons super smart in one fell swoop. So instead of having to add event listeners individually in our own code, man, this is awesome. Because we're running through, we're mapping these things out. And in the process of mapping, remember, we're returning back a response. And in that return, it's updating the DOM with a smart button. Isn't that crazy? So we start with a really dumb button. We run it through a map, and it returns a smart button back to the DOM. It's pretty freaking awesome. Okay, this is a great point to stop. I'm going to answer any questions you have, and then we'll take a break. So Joseph says, is map transforming it into a new button only on the DOM? So only for this session. If this was happening on a live website, when the visitor came back to the site, will this process happen again? Awesome. Yes, Joseph. It is only happening on the DOM, meaning if the JavaScript was disabled, we could not have this functionality. And if we were trying to save something in memory, it wouldn't persist. This is just happening on the DOM on like a shallow level that way. So you're right. It's pretty fragile if you think about it. But so is any JavaScript. If you're not coding everything in HTML and CSS, Anybody at any time could turn off the JavaScript. But good observation. This is not happening in the source code, meaning these buttons are dumb until they go through this thing, right? So Alejandro says, hey, how would you output which button was clicked? Well, let's try it out really quick. So if we were to come in here and say, okay, how do I know which one was clicked? What do you guys think without me telling you? What do you think? Awesome. So you guys are saying that this keyword, this dot item, console log, this dot item, this item. So let's try it out. Let's mess around with this. So let's just pop this in here. And you're saying, so a lot of you are saying this dot item. So let's just see if this works. Save, run. Okay, click. Undefined, undefined, undefined. What the crap? This dot item is undefined. Okay, why do you guys think that's happening? It's not a string literal. So it's a generic button reference on line 3. Well, it's not really generic, right? Because it does know what button it is. So the problem here is that this keyword is not actually passing through on the event listener. That's really what's going on. We'll talk about that after the break, but there's a DOM way to figure it out. So we'll come back to the this keyword in a second. What do you guys think we could do using DOM methodology to figure out what the heck we're clicking? Brian says, how is this better than using just a combo of array from, node list, map item, console logging items? Is this just for more advanced stuff like inheriting things from other classes and using inherited data, or is it just more modular? The answer to that, Brian, is modularity. So we're going to be adding multiple classes that talk to each other tomorrow. So this is the first step in many to get us to basically to React. Like I'm preparing you for React right now. Whether you knew it or not, now you know. Secret. Okay, so Tom says, well, we could pass event. Aha. So current target, oh ho. All right, let's try it out. So we'll come in here. We'll say console log, and then we could say event dot current target. Let's try that out. Run it. Okay, button 1, button 2, button 3, button 4. There it is. You figured it out. But I want you to notice something very interesting. We didn't pass in the event to our method. Isn't that weird? We didn't have to say event here. That is because it is implied because of the nature of the class. That is the one. Remember I told you, like, well, you probably don't remember, but 20 or 15 minutes ago I said there is one instance where you don't have to pass in the event. That is this instance. So in this case, you don't have to pass in the event object because of the nature of the class's relationship with itself. So you can use the DOM to traverse inside of this and manipulate things, which is pretty cool. Okay, let's take a breather. Our brains have been, mushed a little bit. Let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come back and we'll talk more about some of the things we could potentially do with this keyword and make this a little bit more intriguing. Okay, let's take a break. I'll come back, answer any questions. So just ask more questions and I'll answer them later. 5 minutes. Okay, come on back. All right. So at this point, excuse me, this point we've learned that we can reference an item off of the DOM, that we can add an event listener to that referenced item off of the DOM. We've also learned that we can add a method, and using the DOM, we can update this. But a lot of you had some really good questions about like the this keyword, and I told you to hold on, we'd come back to it. Okay, let's see. Let me answer a couple questions. I didn't see them. Carlos says, are there different scenarios where you would want to use either current target or just target? Yes. But we talked about that yesterday. To just give a really quick recap, basically the time you would want to use just target is if you had a big event listener over many items and you wanted to know explicitly what was clicked on. Otherwise, current target's going to grab the whole thing that you touched. So that's the difference. Target is individual elements. Current target is the whole thing that you clicked on. So hopefully that helps, Carlos. Just depends on the use case in those two worlds. Okay, I'm gonna scroll up, see if there's any questions. I think I answered. Okay, I answered Brian's. Okay. Tom says, so console log, you clicked event or similar. Okay, let's try it out. So Tom's saying, could you put this inside that method? So let's see if this works. So based on, guys, what I always like to do, by the way, like when I'm coding by myself and I'm learning, I like to guess before I do something if it's going to work. I'm like, okay, is this going to work? Like logically, do I think this is going to work? And I try to theory craft why this would or would not work. And so in this case, I feel like this would work because I've got an event. I know that event is passed in implicitly, so I know I've got it. I know I've got the current target. And the only thing I'm like, okay, is there inner text inside my current target? There should be. So I'm going to say that this should work. So let's try it out. We run it. Button 1, there we go. Okay. So I mean, I just want to show you how some of my thought processes go. All right. Brian says, hey, we can still pass in anonymous functions to the event listener, right? Absolutely. And I'm gonna show you some different examples here. I don't know if we don't need to show an anonymous. Arrow functions basically do the same thing, except they don't pass into this keyword reference. So let's talk about that. Okay, now that we've got a decent handle on the DOM, so I'm just going to make it a little more simple here. And I'm just going to say, DOM way. And then I'm going to bring this console log up here. So now we know the DOM way, and this is also the DOM way. I'm going to introduce you, because you guys are asking about the this keyword way. And it's a little interesting. There's the ES5 way, and then there's the ES6 way. So let me talk about the ES5 way first. So we just say this dot item, right? Because that makes sense. It's the button. Then we're going to add an event listener. Actually, let's just borrow everything from here, and then I'll show you the new parts. So it's just like the DOM way in that it's set up the same way. The only difference is this area right here. Because remember, a lot of you said, and I don't blame you, by the way, for saying this dot in the console log down here. You were like, hey, why can't you just say this dot item? Console log, this dot item. Right? This was our first go at it. And so we hit run, and we tried to run it. The problem is it's coming back undefined because it didn't know exactly what this was when it came to this event listener. Because remember, this event listener is passing a callback function. It's not aware of its surroundings. So we have to pass in the this keyword explicitly. So here's how you do it. I don't know if any of you remember on Wednesday when I told you that to hold on to the dot bind, I said we'd use it in a week. Well, guess what? It's been a week. So those of you that were holding on to that for a week, you're welcome. Here we go. But here we go. The bind, which binds the this keyword inside of a function used for later, guess what? We can use it now. So we're going to pass in this, meaning this keyword up here in the class down. So this, let me get my little draw tool out. This is a mind bender, I admit, totally. So in this case, remember how we used the new keyword and then it basically opens this up for shop when we pass in the DOM? Well, everything inside this constructor is technically bound to the this keyword, right? Because we used the new keyword when we made it. So like this dot item is referencing button. And then we're saying this dot button click is referencing this method, right? The problem is the gap between the item and the button is not bridged. And so we need to pass in the this keyword context of wherever we are. And so we're saying pass in the button this keyword, okay? So that's what's happening here. We have to bind the this keyword that belongs to the constructor function. And once we bind that, then we get a different result. So let's go find out. So now that we've got the this keyword bound, here we go. Save, run, clear the console, click. Aha! This dot item now knows what the heck this is. It was passed in, and now it knows that it was this button up here. Because this dot item is the same thing as the constructor's this keyword. So that's how we can do that in ES5. Meaning no ES6 syntax was used in this event listener. Let's see. Marshall says, this part on the homework? Yes, this part could potentially be on the homework, and I'll explain to you why shortly. You could also just use the DOM way, though, on the homework. So I'm going to show you 3 ways to do the same thing. I'm going to let you decide which one you want to do. But they all have different powers and abilities. So Brian says button click doesn't have a this. And that's right. Button click right here does not have a this. It only exists inside of here. And so we have to bind it. Because remember, we're not calling button clicks properties. There's no implicit binding. It's just the window keyword again. So when we use this dot item, it's trying to find the window because of window binding, stupid window binding. And no animals were harmed in the making of this function. Yeah, and no animal classes either. So I says, so it wouldn't work if we just do add event listener, click this button, click this. Right. Because the binding of the this keyword has to be passed in and used later. So this is a little weird. I wanted to show it to you. Let me show you the other way. ES5. And now let's talk about the ES6 way. So the ES6 way is pretty interesting looking. So basically, we can pass in an arrow function. Whoops, I'll just do this right here. And within our arrow function, we just immediately invoke this function as our callback. So this is what the most simple arrow function ever can look like, basically. And in this case, we say this dot, right? And so then we can just pass in our reference to our method, and we can say this dot btn click. And then here's the crazy thing. We're invoking the function inside of our callback. So in this case, we're saying click Here's the arrow function reference. And now we're going to pass in button click as a method right here. And the reason I want to show you guys this is not to confuse you or to add, like what's going on. This does matter. What matters is that the arrow function does not have its own this keyword. And so it implicitly passes in the this keyword of whatever thing it was called in. In that case, it's this. It's our constructor. So this is actually passing into this keyword properly. And we can invoke it directly inside of here. So if we do that, if we run it, our button works again with the same call, like the this keyword works again. This, I admit, is super advanced understanding of the this keyword plus arrow functions. I don't expect you to have ever thought about this ever, but I did want to show it to you. I did want to show it to you and say arrow functions are pretty cool because they don't have a this keyword attached to them, so they can just pass it through them. But you had to immediately invoke the function inside of here. So I think that's pretty fun. I don't know. I don't want that to hurt your brain though. So maybe it's too late for that. But I want to show you the 3 ways you can do this. And the way that I prefer is the DOM way. And I'll tell you why. The DOM way allows us to just simply avoid the this keyword altogether and not have to think about the context of the this keyword. But it also does a disservice to you because as you get closer into React, the this keyword is used and bound all the flipping time. So I want you to know and study these 2 ways, but this is the way that I would do it today if I were you in your assignment, which you'll see. Okay, so DOM way is what I want to use, but I want you to understand that there are other ways. Okay. All right, I'm seeing a bunch of questions. So let me go back to the top. So Brian answered that one. I answered that one. Okay, Alejandro says, I'm a little bit confused. At what point are you adding the smart button back to the DOM? Because from my understanding, we are adding the smart button to the array created from the node list, right? Doesn't that automatically add it to the DOM? Great observation, Alejandro. So here is where we are doing it, right there. That one assignment operator is where we are adding the smart button back to the DOM. Because ultimately, this assignment operator is assigning the result of whatever comes back from this. So if you wanted to pin me down, I'd say it's right there. That's where the smart button becomes smart. But in reality, it's because it's mapping through this button, right, and returning a button every time. It's going through this and getting smart, coming back, and then returning back here. And that's why I keep coming back here and saying, don't forget, there's a return keyword right here. I'm just using that arrow syntax to show you we don't have to use the return keyword, it's implicit. Alejandro says, yeah, I'll save the code pen. Alejandro says, so everything we're doing is assigning to the reference of buttons and added to the DOM? That is exactly right. You got it. Okay. Akshay says, do you have a preference? I prefer the DOM way if I can do it. I can't always do the DOM way because sometimes the tree is so large that trying to traverse the DOM tree. So for example, going back to our DOM tree version, let's say we wanted button 4 to, using the DOM tree, manipulate the main nav up here. Ooh, that's a lot of traversal, right? And so in this case, it might not be wise to use the DOM way. And in fact, it wouldn't even be wise to use the this keyword, because the this keyword have the same problem. It'd be so close. So I think there really isn't a case where you wouldn't have to use the DOM way in what we're doing here anyway with changing things out. So DOM way for life in this scenario. But in React, you're going to be throwing that this keyword around quite a bit. So don't shy away from it. I want you to understand that this keyword. But in this assignment for today, and heck, for the rest of the week, you can use the DOM way to get what you need done. Okay, Brian says, can you make the button click an ES6 function and do this dot button click as the argument? Well, I tell you what, let's not talk about this anymore because I feel like it's not causing any good. So Brian, you can try that on your own. I feel like it was fun to show you those things, but I really want us to zero in because we still got some things I want to cover. So we're going to step away from the ES6 gun for a second. Patrick said, so just a quick rundown on what we did. Number one, we created a button array that takes in all the buttons. Yes. Number two, we constructed a class button that has an event listener inside of it. Yes. Number three, it was returned back. So I don't know how you're lost, Patrick, because you are saying everything right. Everything you just said is right, except, of course, number three with the question marks. But number three is, as this stuff is consumed, it's returned back. So I think you and Alejandro kind of have the same question. Brian saying like this, console log button. Go try it, Brian. Did you try it? Go try it in your code pen. Patrick, your brain's melted. Just want to make sure your brain's not melted, dude. You just rattled off all three things we did. Nice, Brian. So Brian says it worked. Very good. Okay. And by the way, Brian, I want you to try things. I'm not trying to avoid anything. I just want you to do it. Okay, Alejandro says the new button created from the class gets assigned to the button reference and added to the DOM. So let's read that slower. The new button created from the class gets assigned to the button's reference and added to the DOM. That's right. That is right. So let's do a big diagram rebuild of what we just did. So let's just look at one button up here, right there. Here's our button. Okay. Whoa. Okay. There's our button. And then I'm just going to take this out for a little bit so we can see all the things in one spot. Okay. Everything we've done is just in these 16 lines of code. Isn't that crazy? So here we go. I'm going to start from 0 and go super slow. So what we did first is we built HTML. So over here, this is the first thing we did. We built a class called button, and we put just some random text inside of it, button1. That was the first thing we did. We just HTML. So second thing we did was we CSS'd, right? We put a border on it. We made it look like a button. Third thing we did is we set up a reference, just like we've been doing for Monday and Tuesday. We said let buttons. The reason we used a let, by the way, is because it has multiple items that are getting updated, and it's mutable, so we don't want to mess with it. But in this case, we're assigning the value of document, which is just this, right? Just the DOM. So whenever you see document, it's the whole thing. Query selector all, which says, what do you want in the document? And then we said, get this thing with the button class on it, which happened to be right here. Ding, 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 same thing. And so the query said, aha, I know what you want. You want these buttons right here. I'm going to give you these buttons, and I'm going to return them all inside of a node list because that's what I does. So that's what this line does. It gives us a node list back. Okay, so we're all caught up there as far as how we got the crap from the DOM. Now we've got our buttons. We've got our node list of 4 buttons. And then we're using the assignment operator. And this is where things get interesting because we're using the DOM, which is a live, living, breathing thing. What I mean by that is if I go into inspect element and I change this content here, see, this is live. See how that's live? And as soon as I let go of this, as soon as I stop typing in this and move out, as soon as I stop and I come out here and I click, it's getting an update just like we're doing with our buttons. Okay, this is actually a very silly, simple example of exactly what we're doing with our buttons. And that assignment operator is allowing us to do that. Because we're saying, okay, update the new live list. But what are we updating to? Well, we're updating from this monstrosity. So let's review this monstrosity. So now what we're doing is, first off, because we have a node list and we want to use map just to convert it to make our lives easier, that's why we're converting it into an array. Now, some of you might say, hey, couldn't we just use the native for each loop inside of the node list? And I would say, yeah, we could, except that we'd have to set up a callback it would be a lot more work than just using our map. So map in this case is just for convenience. So we could do this with just the node list. But in this case, array.from is going through and converting our node list into an array. That's all we're doing. And then I'm just using chaining. I could go down to another line right here and say buttons again, and then map and whatever. But we're going to keep it all in one line. And what's going to happen is that map is now going to map over. Now remember, map allows us to grab an item and convert that item into something new. That's the whole point of map, is it's meant for conversions. And so what we're doing is we're converting this dumb button that doesn't do anything into a new button. So in that conversion process, we're using some ES6 arrow syntax here, and we're getting an implicit return, meaning we don't see the return keyword, but it really is returning because we don't have any parameters we're passing, so we can do that. Not multiple parameters, I should say. We're just passing in button, which is one parameter. So because of that, we can use the rule set here that allows us to have this really clean looking thing. Now, I admit that maybe it's too clean, right? Maybe this is too good looking, and it doesn't explain a lot what's going on. And so that's why I kept pointing us back here and saying, look, it's the same thing as this. It's the same thing that's going on, and then you can see the return keyword here. So then what's going on is these buttons are getting popped up into this class right here. So then the class goes through, and remember how we did console.log this.item, and it was 4 buttons, one by one. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not 4 buttons at once, it's 1 button at a time because of the loop, right? It's looping everything and doing callback once per loop. 1, 2, 3, 4. It just happens at computer speed. So it seems like it's instant, but it's really all 4 one by one. Then we set up a reference to this item.button, and we put it in basically the memory of the constructor by saying this.item is assigned the value of button. So now we don't have to say button over and over again. We can say this.item, and it's referencing the constructor. Now you might be going, this seems pretty simple. Could we just do this? Button.add event listener. Yes, we could do that. But as we expand out our objects, we want to use that this dot process to contain everything inside of our constructor functions, this keyword. So this keyword on the left came from our new button. So let me just draw a line to it. These are the same, these came when we said new button. It passed in the this keyword with the button. So this is contextually tied to our class now, our constructor function. So when we say this, I want you to think about this area right here. Then what do we do? Well, we set up the button to be a reference, right? This is our DOM reference, so it's just like button 1 came in here. And then we're saying, okay, button 1. Now I want to add event listener to you. It's going to be a click event. And then I want to pass in a callback function, which in this case is this.buttonClick, which just happens to be a method inside of our constructor. So then we're going to come back down here and say, okay, I just got told that I'm attached to this thing. And on click, so click occurs. Well, I should be clear here. At this point, the button is now returned back to the DOM. Like everything that we needed to make it smart already happened. So all it did is come in here and equip a method on top of a button. And then it said, all right, I'm done with you. Go back to your return statement and come back to your button that's a live list on the DOM. I think that's maybe one of the moments we're missing here, is that all we're doing is equipping this button with a new method, and then we're sending it right back down the chain via the return keyword, and it comes back over here. And that's how it gets onto the live list on the DOM. And then now that this thing has this new equip method on it, we can now click it, and it runs everything that we can do. Because remember, this is a constructor ultimately. It created a new object. And in this case, the object is a DOM object and not just a silly little Pebbles informational object. This is like a real object that we can click and manipulate, which is super cool. Okay, so that is what we did. We went to the DOM, we looped through the DOM, made a new button out of the DOM, returned the button with a new ability of clicking. I see several people typing, so I'll let you guys finish your typing. But what we're going to do next, yeah, this is Pebbles on steroids. Never thought I'd say that. But what we're going to do next is we're going to say, now what can we do with these buttons to manipulate other DOM objects around them? Because right now, just console logging out what the DOM thing isn't that cool, right? We want to do something. We want to change something that exists in these buttons or does something in these buttons. So Tsai says, just a suggestion, it may be clearer if we call the blue buttons in the map button node list and the yellow button array. So you're saying you would like this to say button node list, but it's not a node list anymore, right, Tsai? It's a button array. So I think maybe a better thing is to say this, button array item, right? Button array item. If you wanted to be like, if I'm following what you're saying. But in reality, I could counter what you said and say, look, it's just the button. Like this button is this button. It's the same thing. It's just a reference. Okay, sorry, can you give me you're saying no, the blue button's plural. You're saying like right there? Okay, so you're saying it would make more sense to you if I said buttons node list, like that. And then you're saying update that to say button nodes list. Oh, you're like, you want it to be really literal of like what's being returned there. I mean, that is true. It is the button node list, but I mean that it's not really descriptive of what it is, you know, because like it's buttons. It's not really a button node list. Because at the end of the day, it's a brand new DOM item. But if it helps you understand it, it does work still. So we can't, so Tsai, we're reassigning the variable. Notice there's not a let here, right? That's not a new thing. We're reassigning the button nodes list. So maybe this is a good aha moment for you. And other people, like this is really good. This is a reference, right? This is the variable. So this cannot be named something new because we're actually looking at our original reference. This is not a new variable. I'm not like doing that. This is referencing our node list that we just made. And it has to be this way, by the way, because of the nature of the DOM. So that's why we call it buttons, because that's what it is. It's buttons. So hopefully you're going, oh, wow, okay, we're not actually making two new variables. We're using one variable one time, and then we're updating the value of that variable to be an updated button. Okay, you follow it? Awesome. And this is, guys, you might be going, who does this? Who codes like this? And I'm saying React developers code similar to this. So React has similar properties here. We're actually doing some pretty advanced stuff here, like just to be really forward. We are doing advanced JavaScripting right here and pushing yourself forward in a lot of ways that, like, I don't teach this way in my college classes, not at all. People couldn't handle it. So, I mean, I'm giving you more than I give at college because we could handle it here. We came down a different path, and it's more recent. But this is pretty advanced stuff. If you think about the simplicity of it, though, you're going, oh, yeah, I get it. We got an HTML element that's being churned through on the DOM, and we're updating the DOM with our new object. Like, conceptually, I think you guys are like, yes, I get it. I know what we're doing, but the details of it can be a little confusing. And so that's why you got to go play around with it and break it a little bit. All right, so we've hit our next break time. Take a 5-minute breather. We'll come back, and we'll start manipulating some elements in this DOM with our new method in our DOM. Okay. 5-minute timer. Reset. Start. Okay. Step away from the computer. All right, come on back. So yeah, Carlos made a good comment. He said, "Hey, I swapped out the const and it works. It does work. Thinking twice. Sometimes when you're live coding, you're like, well, yeah, you're right. But in reality, const does work because we're not mutating the actual value. In this case, it's still using this value when it returns, which is kind of weird, right? Because it's like we are actually mutating the value quite a bit right here as far as like doing a stuff to it. But I think the interesting thing, the fact that const does work here, is because it ultimately is the same value that we passed into it, which is pretty interesting. But that's way deeper than I want to go right now. So here's our button clicks. They're working. Let's talk about how we can manipulate other objects into our DOM. Tom says it really nicely, by the way. We are not mutating the pointer reference, so const stays valid. So I appreciate you saying that, Tom. That's exactly right. All right. So what I mean by that is there's a couple ways we can mutate. Sorry. There's a couple things we can change in the DOM. One, we can do global references. Like we can go grab something that already exists. For example, our hamburger. So remember our good old fashioned hamburger. And so with hamburger, we could go grab hamburger using just our tweenmax statement inside of here on this button. So in this case, tweenmax2 is just a library and main nav is just somewhere on the page. So let's see if this works. Run it. Click the button. And look at that. It does indeed work because it's global. Like it's just this selector right here is just using DOM on a global sense. So there's no need to be worried about current target or this or all that. Just want to point that out that these button clicks are just event listeners that, if given something global, can consume something global. So again, be careful about global stuff because you could use a button down here to touch the menu and you wouldn't want that, right? So it's cool. It's fun to see this button click and then something happen up here, but it's not really something that we would want to do normally. So for what we want to do normally, we want to manipulate things in the sphere or the domain, the tree, because it's a DOM tree, around our item. So if we had a button, which we do, we have these buttons in here, we could manipulate something else outside of the button, near it, right? So for example, we could manipulate the node, the parent node of the button. So what is the parent node of button? It's buttons, right? And so let's go play around with this and say, all right, can we see a color change? Let's change everything to orange on the parent node and see if anything changes. There we go. It did change, right? So the parent node could be buttons. So let's go try and change that in JavaScript and not in CSS. So here's how we can do that. If we go down to button click using the DOM way, all right? So in the DOM way, we get to say event.currentTarget. Well, we know the current target is button. How can we traverse the DOM? How can we go up and see what's in the DOM? Do you guys remember that? Louis-san says parent node. Okay, so let's try that out. Parent node. Oops. So in this case, let's see if it worked. Save, run, click the button. And look at that, it grabbed the parent node. Okay, interesting. So if we hit button 2 versus outside the button, same result. Now, some of you were asking, I think Carlos, somebody was asking, well, what if you use target? So let's try that out. Target, save, run. Let's check this out. If I hit button 1 versus outside the button, same thing. So in this case, we're good to go. So this doesn't really give a good example, but if we had a huge event listener across a huge space, target would be different. But in this case, we're just saying current target on the whole button. All right, so we can see that the parent node does indeed change. So we should be able to say on parent node. Let's get the class list, which is just a DOM token list that has methods on it like what? We could say toggle or add a class, right? So if we wanted to toggle a class off and on, well, we're not going to do this in a console log anymore, right? Just make sure we're not going crazy. All right, so we're going to say event dot current target dot parent node, which is going to be our buttons. So it's as if we're right here. Then we're going to say go to the class list and toggle a class off and on. Well, the thing is, we have to have something to toggle off and on. So we could go in here and we could say, given that buttons is on this level, we go down here and we could just say buttons color. And we could say color orange. See if that works. So we come over here, buttons dash color. Whoops, what am I doing? That would not work. Come in here. Okay, buttons color. So what we're basically doing is saying toggle this class off and on, right? But this is kind of crazy what we're doing. We're grabbing the event of what we clicked, so this button down here. We're then traversing the DOM, so we're going up in the DOM, grabbing the parent node of the button click. We're then going to the parent node's like element and saying, hey, let's look at your class list, which is a DOM token list. We're then using a method on that DOM token list called toggle, and then we're toggling off and on buttons color, which should toggle off orange and off and on. Let's try it. Let's see if this craziness works. Run. Okay, so if I click it, didn't work out. So in this case, I'm wondering if I did something wrong with my toggle button here. It should go up to my parent node, because there's our parent node, right? Buttons. Did I mess up my CSS specificity, I wonder? Let me go try adding buttons color on buttons really quick. Just see if that works. No, it does work, so that's interesting. So that does work. Let's go see if the DOM thing actually ran, though. So inspect this element. Let's see if our tree is what we think it is. Oh, I freaking called it dot buttons like a derp. Oy, oy, oy. That was not on purpose. That was just me being a dum-dum. So save, run, and let's see if we can click it now. Ayo, there we go. So when you're not doing syntactical issues, you get things to work. Pretty cool though, right? So we're now using the DOM to traverse based on where we clicked to manipulate something else. I think that's pretty awesome. And so if we were to keep going up that chain, so if we look at our HTML source, oh man, this thing is, CodePen is not responding to me anymore. Look at that. Assignment to constant variable, not allowed here. So maybe I can't do the const like I thought I could. Interesting. I wonder if that's something that was in old code. Let's see here. clear that, run it. So maybe that was actually doing that. Interesting. So, well, okay, now my interest is piqued. I wonder if it was a typo or if it really can't do that. It makes sense that we couldn't do it, but let's try it anyway. There it is. Can't do it. Okay. So we've got to use let. So I don't know how yours was working, Carlos. That's weird. Maybe it's because we were messing with the DOM itself. Okay, well, now my interest is super peaked. So let's get rid of this. If we're just console logging, I wonder if there's no harm, no foul. So clear this console, save, run. Nope, can't do it. Interest has now been satisfied. Got to use a let, like I thought from the beginning. Dang it. Carlos, how does yours work? Or maybe it wasn't working? I don't know. Initially, it didn't make sense to me. And the pointer thing that you said, Tom, I mean, I was feeling really good about that, but guess I got to check my console before I get all crazy. Okay, so button toggle here. Oh yeah, I turned off my orange stuff. So let me get rid of this here. There we go. And there we go. Okay, so run. Hit this button and orange, sweet. And we can toggle it off and on with clicks, right? Because we're toggling instead of just adding. All right. So that's one thing that I need you to understand for today's assignment is that we can traverse the DOM. Also, this button is probably not the best example, but it's what we've got right now. I have a little bit of regret of going down the button path because there's something else I want to show you. And I cannot read. I'm going to refresh my page. 1 second here. I cannot use CodePen at all today. There we go. I was like dragging for minutes. So in this case, I want to show you something really interesting that is probably not showcased really well by using this button. You'll see what I mean in a second. So within button, right? Let's say we have this, and we probably should have put this like in a P tag or something. But because right now it's kind of a naked content and we can't really do anything with it. But let's say that we had multiple items inside this button, and it's a div, so it's valid. And so we could just say, say div, let's say extra. And we'll say this is extra stuff. So if we save it and run it in the first button here, you can see, this button's just awful. I shouldn't use buttons anymore. Okay, let's go down to buttons, make this bigger. Make these big old buttons. Okay. Then within these buttons, I've got this stuff called extra stuff. Well, you know what? Ultimately, what I'm trying to show you is that you can traverse the DOM inside your class constructor. And I'm trying to find the best way to think about it outside of a button. And I think the best way to think about it is to kind of do what the assignment does today. But I'm also like, I don't want to go over the solution with you. So there's my internal debate right now. I want you guys to know how to do something without giving it to you exactly. And so here's why I'm doing this little weird extra div. Because I thought, yeah, I'll just jam this in here. It'll make sense. But now that I see it, it looks so stupid. So save, run. Let me show you what I mean by this. So we've got button 1, and then we've got extra right there. So in this case, I can actually traverse inside of my object and say, let's look at what's inside this button. So check this out. I could say this dot, and then I could say extra, right? Because that's the stupid thing I was doing. And remember, this is my own name that I'm doing. Then I can assign it the value of going to this dot item, which is going to be button. So I'm going to look at my button, look inside of it. And now, because I'm looking inside of it, guess what? I can use like a query selector, like right here inside of my constructor. And I can say, go find the extra thing. In this case, it's just extra, right? This is totally used today in your assignment. And so that's why I'm like jamming it in here. But again, I'm full of regret for how crappy this example is, but it does do the job. So in this case, I can come in here and I can say, do something to that piece. So I could say this.extra.style.color, right? I could change it to like red. So notice that before I run the code, extra's black. After I run the code, we should see that in our constructor on load, like when we hit the run button, it's going to loop through all of our buttons and it's going to try to find anything that says query selector extra. I do wonder if there needs to be an extra on every one. So let's find out if we get an error. Nope, there we go. So see how extra turned red? And it was inside of our button class. So what we can do, just to review, is I set up a reference to the new thing I wanted to return. I then used this.item, which is basically button, to query select inside of itself, like its own little mini DOM tree, right? And then I went in and I said, aha, I found you, turn you red. This is a direct use case that you're going to be using in your assignment today. So that's why I showed it to you like so directly. But let me show you what your assignment's going to be, and this will make a lot of sense. So without further ado, you now have all the tools to accomplish your assignment as far as the guided demo goes. Let me show you what the expectations are today for your assignment in Components I. So you're going to be doing a thing called a news feed. And the news feed, I've given you all the HTML and CSS. Like it's all there for you. The only thing you got to do is you've got to go in here and run your Let's Watch compiler from the top level newsfeed component and open an index into your browser. Then you're going to go in and you're going to import your less file. And I want you to pay attention to the case sensitivity. Notice it's got a capital M. This pattern is followed quite often when you start using React, when you're using components. So components are often, just like constructors, with a capital letter. And often you will see they're in their own folder. So you can see up here what we're doing. So this is a new little concept. Notice how it's got capital H header, and then it's got header.less inside of it, right, with a capital H. We're going to keep evolving on this as we get closer to React. But we're just kind of massaging our brains for this. No, not an RSS feed, sorry. We already have the articles for you. You've just got to make them look good. So here, I'll pull up a solution on my local machine so you can see it without any spoilers of code. So let's see, solution. News feed, where is it? There it is. So this is what you're going to be building today. It's going to end up looking like this. It's going to start by looking like this, and I'll show you what it looks like. So it looks like crap. So basically, none of your styles are working. None of the JavaScript is working. It's kind of a mess, but we have given you the HTML and CSS you need to get this to turn into this. And so you're going to be able to toggle off and on a menu, which you should have ample skills from Monday and Tuesday to do. Also, you should be able to expand and contract these articles. The cool thing about this, the reason that this is more of a component than not, is that you can add your own articles into the code, and you can see that it'll just go right through the loop and introduce the new articles, no problem. So this is your first component that you're going to build. is an article component that creates new articles given the HTML that exists. So that is what you're going to be doing. You can see how it really coincides with what I taught you today, right? Like almost one-to-one, except for this dumb little extra button. So this extra button is related to this expand button, okay? So just keep that in the back of your minds. Okay, so what I'm asking you to do today is I want you, first off, to study the HTML. I want you to study the structure. I want you to open it up like I did with you today, and I want you to take the HTML seriously and go, okay, I'm going to do what Josh usually does, and I'm going to minimize all the elements and kind of get a lay of the land first. Get like your big elements figured out. So it's going to be like container, okay, sweet, header, awesome, section, okay. Then you open this up and go, okay, what have I got in here? I've got an H1, I've got a nav, and I've got an image. Okay, like I want you to just take note of your landscape. We recently had a student get a job, and he DM'd me. He was freaking out because he was like, what do I do? I have a job. I'm getting paid really good money to do this. And I'm like, congratulations. And they're like, no, they want me to do all their front end now. And away I go. I'm like, what do I do? Do I nuke it and start over? And I was like, dude, the stuff I've been telling you forever, it still applies. Go look at the HTML, study the HTML first, and then work your way closer to the JavaScript. And he was like, oh my gosh, thank you. Came back and said that it totally helped to study the HTML first. Because this is what everything is using. Even in React projects, the HTML doesn't go away. It's still there. Okay, so study the HTML and look at the structure. So first thing you got to do is you got to import your last file, follow the instructions found in the menu.js file to complete the menu functionality. So if we go to the menu.js, you can see that we've given you line-by-line instruction on what should happen here. And we've given you some pieces to accomplish it. Spoiler alert, this is not that hard. It's just a toggle off and on, right? Like you know how to do this. This is Monday and Tuesday. The thing that's going to be a little bit harder is the article.js. So article.js looks very similar to what we did today, but you got to follow these instructions and figure it out yourself. So you're going to add a click handler. You can decide if you want to do ES5, ES6, or DOM way. I prefer the DOM way, just let you know. So you're going to basically fill this out and figure it out on your own. And then if you do everything right, your end result should look like this. Now, those of you that are like totally following, you probably fly through this really quick. I want you guys to use animations. I want to push you, use GreenSock in combination with this so that when you hit that expand button, it does a nice expand, or maybe it fades in. Like I want you to push yourself there. Those of you that are struggling with this, take it slow. Go watch the video again. Look at the guided demo. See the similarities, okay? Like there's something for everybody here. Okay, so that is your assignment. Any questions that I can answer regarding the assignment today? Marshall, you asked a question, it looks like a couple minutes ago. You said this dot extra, this line, blah, blah, blah. This line only looks for items inside the div. What about finding items at the top of the page? At that point, Marshall, I would actually probably just use a different query selector. Because my goodness, trying to go through the DOM like this. So to answer your question, if I was doing this, Marshall, parent node, like that would be so crazy, right? But that is what that's what you'd have to do if you were going to traverse the DOM that way. So there are points where the DOM is not smart to use, but even then the this keyword would have the same problem, like it would. Because the this keyword is just referencing this. It doesn't know anything outside of it. So ultimately, there are times when you want to put a reference to something outside here in a variable, like let some reference, assign the value of document, some global thing, right? But yeah. Great observation there, Marshall. Okay. Linda says, can you use the for each instead of repeating parent node? Well, the problem with for each is it doesn't return the values as a converted value. So, and it manipulates the original array. So that's why we're using map here. We're using the map syntax to convert it and call a callback. But you could try it out yourself, Linda. And in fact, I recommend you do after you get the assignment done. But remember, for each manipulates the original array, map does not. It returns a new array. Okay. Anything else I can answer before you head off to lunch? Sorry for this stupid example. I'm like ashamed of it, but whatever. I'll get a better one in the future. It is extra special. Oh man, but the concept is the same no matter what. Even if I had a better example, because guys, ultimately I'm just having you do that here with the expand button. Okay. I'll give you a pro tip because I screwed you on that thing. Down here, notice there's no expand button. Do you see it? Nope, it's not there. Huh. So I wonder what could help you find it. Okay, there you go. That's my recompense. Okay. Brian says, I notice that when I click on extra, that it doesn't bubble up like in the DOM when using this .item. So are you using the ES5 or ES6 way? Because if you don't, then of course it won't work. So there you go. You can't pass in this and expect this keyword to work. You've got to, DOM, it has to be DOM to DOM, or you've got to use the ES5 to ES6 way. Which, by the way, I totally deleted. Sorry, I forgot. Thank you, Brian. So if I put in the ES5 way, you can't have them both in there, by the way. You've got to pick one and go with it. So in this case, we can't have the DOM in here. And so we say this dot button dot add event listener click, this dot button click, and we're saying bind to this keyword. So that's all kosher. And then in this case, we'd have to say, well, we'll keep the DOM way. And if we were traversing up and down the DOM here, we're basically using the DOM anyway, though. So if we come down here and we say this dot item, then we get rid of current target, right? And so in your case, you still have event current target. So that's why it's not working. So in this thing, you can't use DOM current target stuff anymore because that's what this is for. So with the this keyword, with ES5 style, ES6 would both do this. Our first thing that we're hooking into is the this keyword, and then we can start traversing the DOM. So if we hit save, run, and then we click, let's see if I mess something up. Add event listener of undefined. Did I goof on that? Style of null. What is going on here? Okay, let's see if I got old console logs in there. Add event listener of undefined. Did I spell something wrong? Oh, I can't. I have to say this dot item, right? So that's another thing in your code. You can't have this dot button. Oh wait, you called yours this dot button. Well, I called mine this dot item. That makes sense. Different code. So running. And now we get new errors. Can't read property undefined, undefined. Okay, let's see what am I doing here. This dot item add event listener. Let's make sure I'm calling the same thing. This dot item dot add event listener. Yep, that looks good to me. Then we're saying click this dot button click, which does look good to me. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I'm missing. And then we're saying bind. Then we come down here. Oh, I'm trying to console log something. I got to get rid of that too. Dang it. Maybe that's what it was. Got to mind your loggers. Okay, and I can't read property of style of null. Let's see. It doesn't like my extra, even though it's going red. Do I have something else getting styled? Shoot. No, I don't. So let me try this out. Get rid of all my errors really quick. Okay, now we click. All right, there we go. So sorry for all those little nuances there, but basically this dot item is grabbing the first item, and then we're still limited to the DOM. So that's why I'm like, why don't you just use DOM the whole time? But at least now you know the difference. So I'll keep this in here for those of you that like the ES5 way or want to like play with it. Just remember that the ES5 has to match the ES5 call right here. So they've got to match. The DOM way is what I'm recommending to you today though. So there you go. Save, run, click. Okay, we're back to DOM. The style thing, let me see if this is working here. See if there's any errors there. Nope. And then we say this dot extra dot style. Cannot read property style of null, but then it does style it. Huh. That's interesting to me. I don't know. I don't know why it's doing that. Let's try do something else. You can leave, by the way. I'm just messing around now. So you're free to go. Head off to lunch. You should be good to go. Anything I change here, I'll pop a message into the channel. But yeah. Thank you guys. Go take a lunch, come back, and start working on that project. And just keep in mind, keep in the back of your mind, this is a component. Okay. All right, guys. I'll look at this further, and I'll get back to you with the new code pen if there's any changes. Thank you, and I'll see you tomorrow for Components Day 2, where we will mesh 2 different classes together. Oh, all right.